this evening we've got the first in our series of three special lectures on major figures in the history of the Marx Memorial Library. And we're specifically looking at Marxist educators in this series to mark 100 years since the foundation of the Communist Party. This evening we're opening with an examination of Robin Page Arnot with Professor Mary Davis, who's our secretary and a Labour historian.
It's almost impossible to cover all aspects of Robin Page Arnot's very long life. He was 95 when he died, and 78 of his years, those years, which is pretty amazing, were devoted to the cause of socialism and communism. Professor John Saville characterised Arnot as a man who for some 80 years remained a socialist and whose ideas and ideals of his early years were still fresh and lively up to within about 2 years of his death. Now, there is some difficulty in the standard biographies, not that there has been a full biography of Page Arnot, compared to the discovery that we've made here in the library of some hitherto completely untouched, unused, uncatalogued material. So, for example, one of the things that is very evident in anything that's been written about it says that he joined the Social Democratic Federation in 1907. Actually, he disputes that himself, having read part of his memoirs. He says that he actually joined the Fabians in 1906. He's very complimentary about the Fabians at this stage. So, you know, it's like it may be not very important, but he particularly mentioned the Fabians rather than the SDF. And I thought he'd joined both, but I'm not sure that he did. But anyway, all of this is the fact that he was so active is borne out by, as I say, these recently discovered papers in this library. They're not sorted, they're not catalogued, and I think I might have been the first to look at them actually. And it's made me change quite a lot of things I'm going to say. So it's well, not in principle, but in detail, some of the details. So these transcripts were conducted by Eddie Dare in 1980 when Page Arnot was 90. Now the transcripts are of taped interviews, and so, as I say, Page Arnot is talking incredibly lucidly about his life and different aspects of his life, but these transcripts only got up to 1921, and they're kind of that thick, just up to 1921. But there is also he's also written his memoirs. Now they're unpublished. Alan Unwin, the publisher, showed some interest in these memoirs, but and we've got the incomplete manuscript of his memoirs, which do take us further along. But really, this together with a transcript shows that not only did he have a phenomenal memory, but tremendous erudition, analytical skill and historical knowledge. I mean, for example, his analysis of the Boer War, which obviously he didn't witness, but I mean, it's just incredible. It really is. I think that the whole lot the transcript, the memoirs would provide a phenomenal, rich primary source material for Labour movement historians. I mean, it's pretty good stuff. Now, he was followed, and he was in every way by MI5 and Special Branch throughout his life. His MI5 files miss the point, I think, in describing him as a revolutionary propagandist. He was much, much more than this. MI5 and Special Branch monitored him throughout his life, including the interception of letters and phone tapping, massively phone tapping. The files are very extensive. I mean, they're incredibly extensive. But the files actually provide a historian with very much that is very, very useful, unintentionally, of course, but they are so detailed. So almost every aspect, every letter, everything. His own archive here He kept everything, including gas bills. I mean, it must have been a terrible hoarder. Anyway, but MI5, I think, betters him. He was aware that he was being followed everywhere and he was being intercepted. There's an interesting file, that's an MI5 file in 1951. In May of that year, he addressed a miners' school. And in this MI5 have transcribed this, of what he said. He said, this is page Arnot, reported verbatim by MI5, that he warned against the activities of MI5, the agent of the class enemy, and that espionage has permeated into every organisation of the workers, and in addition, thousands of letters are opened in this country every week. MI5 tell us that Robin Page Arnot said that. Well, oh, so true. Anyway, to mark the centenary of the Communist Party, I'm going to concentrate on only two aspects of his life, which one is his leading role as a communist, but I also I hoped that I would be able to look at his role as the first principal of Marx Memorial Library and Workers' School from 1933 to 45. But I have to say that the Page Arnot archive gives only very, very scant information about Marx Memorial Library, which is quite amazing, actually. So I've just had to cobble together as much as I can from looking at bulletins and the occasional references in this voluminous correspondence and everything. Very little about the library, but maybe I think there's probably more stuff here, and it will yet to be mined.
Pulled it out and put it in the Marx Memorial Library box or something.
Yeah, well, anyway. So come back next year and maybe we'll have some more. Anyway, he's actually called, his name really is Robert, but he was called Robin. But Robert Page Arnot was born, just the brief biographical stuff first, was born at Greenock in Scotland, on the Clyde. He was the grandson of a Chartist and son of John Arnot, who was 43 actually when Robin was born, or Robert. Father, John, was a Gladstonian Liberal. He was a manual worker and eventually became the editor of the Greenock Telegraph. Obviously, I'm dying to hear this tape, which you can buy for £5, which is, well, I don't know what it is actually, but at least I would be able to hear his voice. He must have had a very strong Scottish accent. Every letter he signed, it was yours, I, A-Y-E. Yours, A. So he must have been very Scottish. I never met him, obviously. Anyway, he was obviously a very bright bloke. He went to Glasgow University. He became actively involved in socialist politics. And it is said that he studied Greek at university, but I don't believe that. He did learn Greek, but I'm not sure that was what he studied at Glasgow. Anyway, in 1914, he went to London to join the Fabian Research Department, which became LRD, Labour Research Department, as a researcher. And he remained working for them and associated with LRD for most of his life. Just very briefly, just a little snippets, that he was, obviously this was during the war, he refused to participate in the war. He was conscripted in 1916, as everybody was when conscription was introduced then, but he refused to serve and was in prison for 2 years in Wakefield as they said, a conscientious objector. He insisted that he was a socialist conscientious objector, which was, in other words, not a pacifist socialist conscientious objector. So he continued, when on release, continued to work for LRD. In fact, he was secretary of it until 1927, but he was on the executive of LRD for about roughly 50 years. He was very involved in every single aspect of the politics of the day, and particularly in relation to the miners, which becomes very important, as we'll see later on. the 1990, well, the period of the war and onwards saw, obviously during the war, the emergence of the shop stewards movement, after the war, post-war, settlement really saw the continuation of militancy, and particularly within the staple industries, mining amongst them, where the employers, the coal owners, were continually pressing for greater profits, and profits could only be for them increased by either lengthening the working day or cutting wages. And so miners were at the forefront of almost every major battle, certainly up until 1926, the general strike. In 1919, in an effort to stop wage cuts and so on, the Triple Alliance was formed in order to support the miners, and there was a strike. The usual device was used by the government, and that is to set up a commission. It was the Sankey Commission, and this is where Page Arnot began his work with the miners, because he, he was from LRD. He presented the miners' evidence to the Sankey Commission, and this was then published by Labour Research Department and became a very, very important. Well, it sold a lot. It was called the miners' case for coal. So this really then established Page Arnot's work, which later on resulted in a phenomenal history of British miners, which I'll come on to in a moment. He was, but also this was a very revolutionary period. He was very influenced by the Russian Revolution, all the revolutions that went on all over Europe at this time. And he, in 1920, when the Communist Unity Convention was held, he was a delegate from one of the organisations that were part of the Unity Conference. This was the Guild Communists. He could have come from any of the other organisations, because I think he was a member of the BSP at this time. So he served on the executive of the Communist Party of Great Britain from 1924 to 38, and he was the British representative to the Comintern in the 20s and 30s. More of that anon. And he was also instrumental in the founding of Labour Monthly. I think that's what this is about, isn't it? Labour Monthly with Palm Dot. And he's very involved in the establishment of the Daily Herald, which became a daily after the war. The situation with British miners continued to really predominate the industrial scene. And in 1925, the mine owners unilaterally suspended national wage agreements. Now, this then led to the situation where the government prepared. I'd love to go into the history of this, because Arnot was very, very involved in all of this. The government. In 1919, the government said they weren't ready. They knew there was going to be a battle, but really from 1925 onwards, after the coal owners announced this wage cut, the government prepared, and they established the Organisation for the Maintenance of Supplies, which basically prepared in a military and in an economic way for what they knew was going to come, which was going to be a strike, a major strike. They didn't know it was going to be a general strike, but it was. So the government, Arnot urged greater preparedness on behalf of the miners and the wider trade union to counteract government preparations, and this body. OMS was seen as a manifestation by the Communist Party as legal fascism, but in 1925, Arnot, along with 11 other communists, were imprisoned for a second time for 5 months. under the Incitement to Mutiny Act. This was part of the government preparations, clear out the leadership, make sure the movement is not unified, and so on.
The Labour leaders, at the same time, had subjected the whole movement to bans and proscriptions against the communists. The government, similarly, in order to terrify the movement, arrested 12 communist leaders, whom I was one. And finally, they arrested 128 miners for trial at their assizes in the autumn of 1925. It had no effect. The workers were not terrified.
And in 1926, he was only in prison. He was in prison for 5 months. During the general strike, which occurred in May 1926, Arnot played a very, very important role. He sat on the Joint Strike Committee. He was a representative of LRD, and his experiences form the basis for a publication from LRD called The General Strike, Its Origins and History. Now, the defeat of the General Strike was a major, major blow to British trade unionists. When I say defeat, I don't think it was defeated. I'd say the betrayal of the TUC after 9 days of strike action was a major blow. Now, this downturn therefore resulted, what happened after 1926 was you had a new turn in trade unionism, the Montana talks, basically the social partnership, don't use strike action, let's get together with the bosses, they're not too terrible, and let's make sure that we have a compromise rather than conflict. Now this then led to a situation where a new period certainly in communist history began. This downturn, this aggressive form of capitalism which was smashing the leadership of most trade unions movement led to a period which is sometimes known as the class against class period. I think this is a very inglorious episode in which Page Arnot played a major role, in my opinion, on completely the wrong side of history, and in opposition to the man who was going to be his successor in this library, Andrew Rothstein, who took the totally opposite position. I think there's an element of sectarianism in Page Arnot, which I think I could detect anyway in 1926, immediately after the general strike. He wrote some stuff about the 2 or 3 articles which criticised not just the TUC, everybody was critical of the TUC, but he also criticised the left within the TUC, including Purcell and A.J. Cook, who's the miners' leader, which was very strange. And in addition, he absolutely raged against the Communist Party leadership for vacillations to the right. He didn't supply, as far as I can make out, any evidence for this, but it was a really damning criticism. And I think it can only be explained by the fact that he was the British representative of the Comintern. The Comintern at this period was taking the line that basically social democrats are social fascists. This was the class against class thing. And I don't think it's a digression, but just to explain a little bit about this period. The Communist Party of Britain in 1927 reiterated its long-standing policy that it was necessary to elect a Labour government pursuing a working-class policy under control of the Labour movement. That's a bit of familiar ring, isn't it? We say that even now. But shortly after that party congress, a telegram arrived from Bukharin, who was president of the Comintern, saying that the attitude of communist parties to social democratic parties should be reconsidered. Now, Page Arnot and Rust represented the Communist Party in Moscow. The Presidium of the Communist International discussed the British situation, saying that their slogan, the one that I just read out about electing a Labour government committed to socialist policies, blah blah blah, they said that this the British situation, that the slogan of the Britain was wrong, and it should be to elect a revolutionary Labour government. And Willie Gallagher was present at this, and he reported that the Communist International line was thrown at us quite unexpectedly and had no relation whatever to the situation actually in existence in Britain. And Gallagher objected to this line. And in 1928, a special three-day Congress, it wasn't a Congress, it was a special three-day Central Committee meeting of the British Party. And the argument of people like Gallagher and Rothstein was that the Labour Party was unlike any other social democratic party. It was a loose federation of organisations like the Cooperative Party and the trade unions, exactly as it is today. And they quoted Lenin when Lenin argued that communists should apply to join the Labour Party as an affiliated organisation, along with the trade unions and so on. There was a vote at the Central Committee meeting on that position, saying the Labour Party is not a typical social blah blah blah, and therefore the Communist Party is right to pursue this policy. And Page Arnot spoke and voted against vehemently, and Rothstein was on the other side. I can tell you all the others who voted this way and that way, but you don't really want to know that. I'm going to keep it to Page Arnot and Rothstein because this is Marx Memorial Library. I think it's interesting that they were diametrically opposed. So Pollitt also was on the side of Page Arnot, and he argued that the Labour Party was now a third capitalist party and had surrendered socialism, and that in forthcoming general elections, I mustn't touch anything. In the forthcoming general elections, the communists should not vote for Labour candidates. This went on. As it developed, the Communist International line became more extreme. It wasn't confined to social democratic parties. It actually extended to trade unions and to all Labour Party or social democratic members. They were all called social fascists. This was the class against class period. So this was this really had a major effect, not just in this country, but as you know, in Germany, of course it did, and it led to a situation in 1933 where, because of the disunity between communists and social democrats, Hitler was able to rule the roost. But I won't say anything about Germany. But the point is that there was a huge battle. The party eventually followed, the British Party followed the Comintern line, and in 1929 its manifesto said, this is the Communist Party manifesto, the Labour Party is the third capitalist party. It is now no longer possible for the Communist Party or the trade unions to bring pressure to bear on the Labour Party from within. So they didn't. 25 communist candidates stood a very derisory vote. Sackler-Wahler, by the way, lost his seat, who'd been a long-standing, supported by the Labour Party MP. And the attitude to trade unions would have also been very sectarian if the Red International advice was going to be followed. But this didn't happen. That's a separate point, so I'm not going to delve into that too much. It was a conflict between the minority movement and the Red International. Anyway, the 10th plenum of the Communist International criticised the Communist Party for its electoral performance. I mean, they only got about 50,000 votes in total, and for not pursuing the social fascist class against class line vigorously enough. Rust and Arnot joined in the criticism of the Communist Party leadership. vehemently supported the Comintern line, condemned the Communist Party for not being pro-Communist International line enough. And as a result, and this is interesting, Bill Rust, who was later to become the editor of the Daily Worker, worked very closely with Page Arnot, and particularly singled out Andrew Rothstein and J.R. Campbell for their view that Communist Party members should vote Labour in the absence of Communist Party candidates. I mean, this discussion is all very, I think, actually quite relevant for us now. So the party central committee circular to members saying that they criticised themselves, saying that the party leadership had moved too far to the right and made mistakes. Rothstein in particular was singled out, and so was T.A. Jackson, Tommy Jackson. So in the 1929, the Leeds Congress of the Communist Party showed that membership had fallen by 4,000 since the new line. But nevertheless, the elections to the new executive committee removed Rothstein, Horner, and Wal Hannington, who actually did get on nonetheless. So this was, I think, not the finest hour for Page Arnot, and I don't know whether he, in the end, or later in life, thought that this was a mistaken position. Probably did, because everybody got over it in the end, but it was a disastrous line. He didn't remain on the executive. He did devote his very considerable skills to the next phase of his life, which was to do with this library. And that's what I'm going to say a little bit about, although there's not much that I've been able to mine. Page Arnot was a key figure in the Marx Commemoration Committee, which was formed on the initiative of the Labour Research Department to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Marx's death. And this led to, as we know, to the establishment of a Marxist Library and Workers' School and Education Centre, which I think we know the history of it here. It was an attempt, again, as we know, to counteract the recent burning of books in Germany, including by, obviously, books by Marx, Engels and Lenin. The interesting thing is that the special branch file gives a completely different interpretation of why this library was open, and it's completely incorrect. It disparagingly refers to the founding of the Marx School in Clerkenwell, and incorrectly says that the library was established under German communist or pseudo-communist direction to secure the transfer of the library of the Institut für Sozialforum, the Frankfurt Institute for Social Research, to this library, to Britain. Now, this is the Frankfurt School. This is Horkheimer, Marcuse, Adorno, all these people. And the MI5 seems to think that all these people were being imported into this country. These are the people they call pseudo-communists. Marcuse in particular, they single out. This is the special branch. Now, in fact, this library went to America. It didn't come here at all. And it implicated LSE in trying to suborn the Frankfurt School to come to London. I mean, they really got it wrong. Anyway, so this is not what happened at all. But funnily, well, it's not funnily enough, it's tragically enough, he says that MI5 say, why were they doing this anyway? Because this library has been confiscated by the German authorities. Well, yeah, so they approved of presumably, of the fascists, A, burning books, and B, closing down libraries. So, I think we've got the right interpretation of how the library was founded, and Special Branch did not get it right. So Arnot was appointed as the first principal of the library, in a post which combined the development and teaching of courses in Marxist political economy, economic theory, and this really occupied his time until 1947. And it was during this period that Page Arnot married his wife, Olive Budden, obviously then known as Olive Arnot, but Olive Budden, I've discovered only through leafing through these memoirs, was a relation of Lord Kitchener on her mother's side. So she was quite a posh woman, to say the least. But she was also a foundation member of the Communist Party, though. And she was a volunteer worker at LRD. So she was a person in her own right, even though she was related to a nasty warmongering, diabolical Tory idiot whose country didn't need him, really, you know, Kitchener. Well, the key thing about the library was that it was a worker school. And the worker school was an incredible success. I mean, I'm quite astounded when I look at some of this stuff to see what was going on. In January 1935, only 14 months after the library and worker school had been formed, it already had 80 affiliates. I wish we had as many. And education classes were attended, the average attendance, well, overall I think it's just those, was 200. They established a three-term course on political economy, had Sunday lectures on Marxism and art. By 1935 to 6, the library is offering scholarships for labour movement, members of labour trade unions, cooperative parties, labour parties, for a range of courses. I mean, the range of courses, just to give you a little flavour, was, I just don't know how they did it, but it was a pretty, oh, I've lost it. The range of courses was, yeah, there's the papers, look, I've left the paper upstairs. Never mind. Was quite phenomenal, massive actually. And it also included a class on Volume 3 of Capital, an extension of, I mean, a long series of classes on Volume 3. I mean, that's pretty good. In 1939 to 40, it established a centre of new education, or new education. Faculties were established. The Faculty of Science, which was presided over by Haldane, political economy, Maurice Dobb. The chair of the Board of Faculties was Palm Dutt. At the beginning during this period, 39 to 40, Palm Dutt, again, he really criticised the London district of the Communist Party. He said that London district was attempting to sort of take over the library, and the secretary of the London party was a man called Fred Bramley, which Page Arnot refers to as a capitalist farmer, and who was a good speaker but spoke shit. I mean, he's come out with this time and time again, actually. The most amazing period that could see, and what I can see of it, was the war years, but especially from 1941, which is when, as you know, from 39 to 41, there was a big, again, another split in the Communist Party over this, whether or not the war should be characterised as an imperialist war or a war against fascism. And this was the time when Pollitt resigned because he thought that the communists should be supporting the war from 39. 41, of course, the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union, so really, and given that Page Arnot was such a strong supporter of the Soviet Union, really things start for him in 1941. But these war years, though, from 41 to 45, were incredible. In the library, education, the library said, was a weapon against fascism. The weekly attendance at classes at Marx Memorial Library, believe it or not, in those years, from 41 to 45, was 5,118. That's the average weekly attendance, but the classes weren't all here. There were classes established all over the country. I mean, and one example that just struck me was Hemel Hempstead, of all places, a titchy little place, you know, blot on the landscape really, had 9 study groups and discussion circles, and 2 were based in factories, 2 were based in different groups, professional groups, teachers and so on. But this was replicated everywhere. Well, I say everywhere, in at least, I think I counted 20 at the maximum places all over Britain. So I'd like to have said much more about the library and that period, but there's scant information, so I'm not going to make it up. But I think there's much more work needs to be done on this, because I think this is a pretty incredible period. I mean, later on under Rothstein it was also good, but I just thought that the fact that they were established during the Blitz, establishing classes everywhere, seemed pretty incredible. And well, yeah, just because of the Blitz, and also in towns there was the mass evacuation as well. So how did that work? I wish I knew the secret. When in 1950. Page Arnot was 60, and the General Secretary of the Communist Party, Harry Pollitt, paid tribute to him and described him as a fighter for the cause of socialism for over 40 years, a tireless propagandist and one who has played a leading part in all the work and activity of our party since its inception. So at this point in his life, Arnot retired from full-time work on Labour Monthly in order to pursue his occupation as a historian. Now, he'd been appointed as a result of his work on the Sankey Commission in 1919. He was appointed as the official historian of miners' trade unions in 1925. He'd already undertaken extensive work for this research, for what was going to be his life's great work, because he wrote the history of the Miners' Federation of Great Britain, but this was accompanied by more detailed studies of the Scottish Miners' Federation, South Wales miners, and so on. He was really held in incredible high esteem by the miners. There were over 1 million miners in Britain in the 20s and 30s. I mean, it was it was the single biggest occupation. He was one of the reasons why we know that he was absolutely adored by the miners is because of what Special Branch tells us. He doesn't tell it himself. Special Branch reported on his performance at Scottish Miners' School. And this is what Special Branch, I can't believe that I've read this. He says, it says, with his soft voice and quiet smile, Arnot was really excellent. He took his audience along the path of Britain's industrial and political history. The effect of the young miners was really terrific. Arnot's encyclopedic knowledge was impressive, and although there was a great deal of discussion, not one of his conclusions was contested by the students. Oh, sweet, from Special Branch. They really thought he was lovely. Later in his life, he became increasingly engaged with reclaiming William Morris for the socialist movement. He felt that William Morris had been completely misused by the labour movement. Everybody thought Morris was wonderful as an artist, designer, and maker of fancy wallpaper. And he says there were 2 major myths about Morris that he wanted to explode. One was the bourgeois myth, and that was proclaimed, he says, with the choice of Mr. Baldwin to open the William Morris exhibition at the Victoria and Albert Museum. And in Baldwin's speech, obviously, he says that there's no mention whatsoever of William Morris as a revolutionary. He's a great poet, craftsman, great artist, great influencer, great whatnot, but he's not mentioned as a revolutionary. More serious, he says, is the myth which has been perpetrated by the Labour Party and the ILP. it pictures Morris as a gentle socialist and fits well with what Ramsay MacDonald, as leader of the ILP, once said of socialism. His socialism was based not on economics, but as having a historical, official and literary basis. And basically he's saying the main burden of this myth, as it has lasted for over 30 years, is that Morris was not a Marxist. And Page Arnot says that William Morris certainly was a Marxist, and he, his particular vision of socialism was distinctly a Marxist one. He talks about his work with Eleanor Marx and incredible stuff, forming the Socialist League, breaking away from the SDF and its racist overtones. He became an established authority on Morris, and the focus, he spoke on the subject of branches, party branches and so on, and he was him and Andrew Rothstein actually wanted to have some more permanent form of commemoration. And the outcome was a decision to establish the William Morris Society as a forum for the exchange of ideas and a means to spread Morris's life and work more widely. He was Arnot acted as the secretary of the society. He, the 50th anniversary of the Russian Revolution it led Arnot to abandon, diverted him from the miners' history, and he published 2 books on the Russian Revolution, a short history of the Russian Revolution and a very, very useful book called The Impact of the Russian Revolution in Britain, where he looked at the Councils of Action, the Hands Off Russia campaign, the Jolly, all of that stuff, and the way in which it had, which we covered actually when we were doing our stuff on the Russian Revolution, some really important primary research. He also was invited to speak at the 100th. No, what was the yes, at the centenary of the. No, it wasn't. It was with the general strike. There was that's right. There was a special thing produced, and there was an exhibition in Covent Garden. He was invited to speak there. He was also invited to speak on the 100th anniversary of the TUC, and he made from what I can gather, I've read 2 versions of speech. One was very, very polite, and the other was absolutely damning. I don't know which one was the one that was given. He began the process of compiling his memoirs in 1968. There's a lot there, never published. He was quite friendly with the publishers, George Allen and Unwin. Unwin was a friend of his, but they were rejected for publication. Looks to me as though we're going to have to do what we did with the unpublished biography of Helen Crawford, and that is we might have to digitise it ourselves or get it published. The thing is that they're probably incomplete. I've only looked at a fraction of them. There's a lot of pages, and again, nobody's looked at this other than George Allen and Unwin, who rejected it anyway, and they're both dead. So there's in the huge archive that is here. Well, it's not that huge, but it is quite big actually. There are frequent references when he's writing abroad to friends in the GDR and Russia and Greece and everywhere about. They're all saying, "How are your memoirs getting on, Robin?" "Oh yes, and I'm still writing. And so they're coming out, and people are expecting to see them, but so far we haven't. So I've just given a briefest of brief introduction to what is a hugely productive and very long life, very, very active life. I think he was probably active or involved in almost every major issue, and I haven't mentioned them all, throughout, really from 1900, just about, say 1906 until the 70s. if not writing about them, actually participating in these events. So I think his major contribution for us, at any rate, is the establishment of this place as not just a library, but a worker school. I think there's a lot that we can learn from how that happened, and I wish there was more archival material to give us we got the inspiration, but the actual knowledge of how they did it. I mean, there were very clever little ways of doing it through the scholarship system, through having links in towns, we talk about live streaming, but they actually set up groups everywhere so that the lectures could be replicated. So this is really a first stab at looking at Page Arnot. I'm not always happy about talking about individuals, so I think it's the movement that's everything, and individuals play their part in it. So the life and times would be much, much more, and I want them probably much better to set it into a historical background. But we decided to pick out these three Marxist educators, and really I don't think I've said nearly enough about the education side, other than the fact that if it wasn't for him, and not just him alone, we wouldn't have had a worker school. And so that concept, I think, is just a fantastic one. No individual gets it right all the time, and I've just outlined, just mentioned a time I think he got it terribly wrong. But that doesn't detract, I don't think, from the overall contribution that all of these three are all men, unfortunately, but all of these three people that we're going to be talking about in this course contributed to workers' education, which is really the key thing. I mean, all of the syllabuses that I've seen always say one thing, and that is that we've got to have a new type of education for workers. We've got to raise socialist consciousness, and that is the purpose of education. The purpose of education is to change things, and you know the really education is a journey and not a destination, and I think that's what we think now. So thank you, Page Arnot, for establishing a worker school.